here. This is a very long course with a lot of information that I'm going to try my best to squeeze into an hour or less here. We're going to be kind of ramshot about a bunch of stuff. But with that being said, please absolutely slow me down. Be sure to ask questions if you have some, because I would love to go deeper into anything that we're going to talk about. And that way, if questions are asked and we stay later, it's not my fault. We're okay with that. But the first thing we're going to do to get started is that if somebody needs a pen or some writing paper, we have something up here. Just a quick, brief exercise. I'd like you to take just a minute and think about any challenges that you're having right now for your garden space and any goals that you have for your garden or other food system. And jot down 2, 3, 4 things that come to mind. Things you want to improve, things you're really struggling with. And I'm going to do the same. And then as you write, or when you're finished writing, you can kind of read the agenda slide there. You don't need me to read it to you. This is going to be a little bit of a mix of some textbook fundamental stuff that's kind of the basis of permaculture, but I also want to make sure that I mixed in some very practical things that we can all do so you can hopefully walk away with something that you either want to try at home or get you thinking about something you can come up with for yourself. So kind of like I said before, we could really go an easy hour into a lot of these and just start peeling back the layers of the onion and dig deep. And this is going to be rather shallow on a lot of it. But we're going to start with what is permaculture. Permaculture is a concatenation of 2 words, and there's some fancy English term for that, and I don't remember what it is, I can look it up, for permanent and agriculture. It's a concatenation of those. And what it is really is getting nature to work for you instead of you constantly fighting nature. Now, there are 2 gentlemen that really made permaculture mainstream and kind of came up with what we know as permaculture today. That was around the early 1970s. One of those men was Bill Mollison, and if you asked him what permaculture is, he would say permaculture is about designing sustainable human settlements. It's a philosophy and an approach to land use which weaves together microclimate, annual and perennial plants, animals, soil, water management, human needs into intricately connected, productive communities. I kind of look at that and I'm like, well, what isn't permaculture? That kind of wraps everything into one there. And that's kind of the point. The other co-creator was David Holmgren, and he would say that consciously designed landscapes which mimic the patterns and relationships found in nature while yielding an abundance of food, fiber, and energy for provision of local needs. Again, that's kind of all-encompassing. So now that we've talked to the 2 head honchos of permaculture, I feel a little bit better asking somebody just a little bit less qualified, and that's this weird guy who's really happy to be leading a new member of one of his food systems. And how I like to say it in 10 seconds or less is permaculture is a design science for resilient, sustainable systems that work harder than me. As a guy who jockeys a desk 50 plus hours a week in a cubicle farm, that's kind of really important to me. So that's what permaculture is in a nutshell as an introduction. I'd like to spend just a second to talk about what permaculture is not. And I think it's important only because for whatever reason, if you went to Google right now and typed in what is permaculture, you might see some things that might not necessarily be permaculture. That might be this. Now, permaculture is a big tent. It can be a big tent. I'm not discriminatory. I have nothing wrong with a nice drum circle after we've done a full day of planting or something like that. However, Google might convince you that permaculture, that your strawberries will flourish because of your drum circle, or your corn will come up because of the certain way you howl at the moon or something like that. That's not permaculture. So just kind of be wary of that as you go through. So why do we care about permaculture, and why is it something we might want to use in our systems? The overall question myself is right there at the top. Is micromanagement best? Now, maybe that's if you have people under you at work, or is micromanagement best for how you're raising your children? Or I think, is micromanagement best for trying to guide nature? There's really two diametrically opposed viewpoints, with permaculturists on one side of the spectrum and folks that maybe work for Scott's Lawn Company or Monsanto and the big people like that on the other side of the spectrum. And the two viewpoints go something like this. One side says, well, nature has no idea what it's doing. It's chaos, it's destruction. We need to get in there and manage and dig and till and spray and bag and net and work. Now, the other side of that, and this is how permaculturists think, is, well, you know what? Nature has been growing plants and animals for a lot longer than we have in industrialized society. She might know what she's doing, and if we get out of the way, it might be best. And in fact, any of the problems that we're trying to correct right now, if we really dig into it, it might just be because humans intervened in the first place, and we're now trying to fix that problem. So kind of keep that in mind as we go through here. And I already said it, we care because we want to try to guide nature to work for us instead of fighting it. This one's big to me. It's adaptable through observation. And observation is a word you're going to hear quite a lot as we go through this. And it really can be a complete toolbox. Now, it's not a silver bullet, and it's not magic. Sometimes you need to apply the ethics and the principles we're going to go through here in a second, along with some creativity and ingenuity and some critical thinking. But applying what permaculture is can really solve a lot of different things. Permaculture can scale up or down depending on the situation. Whether you just have a balcony or a small deck with some herbs potted up or something like that, permaculture can help you. All the way to if you're trying to manage a huge, expansive farm somewhere, and anything in between. Stacking functions, along with kind of wanting to be lazy and having nature work for me. If I can do a little bit of work and set something up, and that can produce multiple things for me that are beneficial, you bet I'm going to do it. So trying whatever we can do to stack as many functions and as many benefits as possible. And last, I personally care about permaculture because of food security. And maybe you don't have as many concerns, that's totally fine, but if you're kind of like me and worried a little bit about the food that goes onto our children's plates that's been sprayed with Roundup constantly or been genetically modified so that it's now part fruit fly or something that corn is not supposed to be, and also in hard times. Now, I don't necessarily mean that the zombies have to wake up or aliens have to land, but you know, if anybody's looked at their grocery budget lately, we all know that food prices are going up. So if for some reason I happen to lose my job or we came across some other hard time, knowing that I have some resilient, sustainable food systems right out my back door really helps out. The other thing is I know going to Dorothy Lane Market, the organic asparagus, organic strawberry, stuff like that is pretty pricey, right? If I can do that myself and save a couple bucks, well, that stretches my food budget so I can then afford the organic milk or stuff because I don't have a milk cow in my backyard. So the first kind of textbook fundamental, and this is the first thing that any good permaculture class should discuss, is the prime directive. This is again by Bill Mollison, and I'm just going to let it speak for itself there. We're not going to peel back the layers of the onion too far, but he says the only ethical decision is to take responsibility for our own existence and those of our children. That leads us into the three ethics of permaculture. Earth care. At all times you want to try to do anything you can to not harm the earth. People care. Same thing. Anything you set up, you do not want to harm yourself, your neighbors, even somebody further downstream that you've never met or you've never seen before. And return of surplus. Hopefully, if we set our systems up right, they're going to be bountiful and they're going to yield a lot of stuff. And it's up to us as the designers and the managers what to do with that. Some stuff, a lot of stuff, we reinvest back into the system so it can be even more fruitful the next year. We can kind of close that loop and not have to bring a lot of outside inputs in. Maybe you grew a whole bunch of tomatoes and you can put a bushel of those over the fence to your neighbor, and he grew too many apples and you flip-flop in a couple months, something like that. So there's a lot to return of surplus as the third ethic. Building on the three ethics, we have the 12 principles of permaculture. And Here again, we're just going to blow right by them, even though a lot of these can be so deep. Number one, observe and interact. I really like that word interact. Notice it's not control. Number two, catch and store energy. We're going to be talking a lot about that when we get to the practical stuff. Number three, obtain a yield. This one was important to me because at times I would find myself kind of having busy work or stuff that didn't make a lot of sense, like moving firewood from one spot to another, and I'm like, why did I do that? So always making sure that the effort that I'm putting in is going to produce something for me. Another example of this is that at times I have some big brush piles on my property that I don't really have any other use for, can't figure out what to do with it. Well, I realized that if I put out a call to some neighbors, especially those with young kids, we had a big bonfire at that brush pile as a way to build community, come together, share some food. So I obtained a yield from just my brush pile sitting there. Number four, apply self-regulation and accept feedback. Number five, use and value renewable resources. And no, that doesn't mean you need to put a $40,000 solar array on the roof. 6, produce no waste. Man, that's a tough one. 7, design from patterns to details. When we really stop and take a step back and observe nature and what she does, things like looking at a map of rivers and topography of our country, you can see streams and creeks form into tributaries that form into larger rivers that go down to the Mississippi, something like that. That's a pattern. Maybe it's that way for a reason, and we want to set up irrigation like that. If you look at the back of a leaf and you see the vein system and how that's set up, maybe that's something we can mimic somewhere else. So you always want to try to design from patterns to your own details. Number 8, integrate rather than segregate. 9, use small and slow solutions. 10, use and value diversity. 11, use the edge and value the margin. That's one I never really got for a really long time when I started reading about this stuff a few years ago. If we walk out to virgin woods or virgin forest, not like this nicely manicured stuff out here that they keep, it's really neat to see the edge of systems, where forest meets a meadow. And there's just abundant crazy life right there, isn't there? That's where you get all your bushes and your brambles, unfortunately a lot of honeysuckle, stuff like that. But not just plants, that's where a lot of animals like to hang out. Some mice and stuff like to hang out there, which means snakes are there. Any good hunter knows that white-tailed deer are an edge kind of an animal. So if we can mimic that and do whatever we can to create as much edge as possible in our designs, that's really going to help us out. Number 12, creatively use and respond to change. All right, so one of the first things that we can do when we're looking at raw land or we want to come back and reevaluate what we've done with our own land is a sector analysis. So what is a sector? A sector is an inflow or an outflow of energy. And I did make a note here, it can be, and usually is, either positive or negative, or at certain times it can be both. So one sector that we need to take note of would be wind. In the winter, sometimes the wind comes out of the north, it can be pretty harsh. Maybe we want to set up a windbreak to protect some stuff. You can look on a large scale like that. You can look on a small scale where if we build up some raised beds or something and there's even a little bit of a gully in between, wind and cold air can settle down in there and create a microclimate where we need to make sure that we either need to protect that stuff or make sure it's cold tolerant. Solar. Solar sector is important, as we know that more in the summer, the sun rises and goes higher in the sky. In the winter, it rises and sets lower in the sky. We can use that to our advantage, figuring out what we need to plant where, what we need to protect or shield in the summer, and what we don't need to do in the winter. Wildlife. You can use this in a positive way, like setting up places where beneficial insects can come and prey on the bad insects that you don't want. Or, one of the things I wrote down, deer. Deer are the absolute bane of my existence. And anybody who's been to my garden can see what I've tried to do to stop that. But we need to try to figure out a way to protect our stuff from wildlife. And last, could be either positive or negative, view. So maybe your neighbor doesn't like to pull the curtains down all that often. and you want to try to figure out a way to block something you don't want to see, or there's a rusty hulk of an old Chevy truck in their yard, and you kind of want to grow something that looks pretty in front of that. And one personal example for me was that in my backyard, I was thinking about the best place to put a woodshed, because I try to heat my home with wood as much as possible. And I'm like, oh, this is great, it's near the door, it'll get westerly wind, blah, blah, blah. I was thinking of all these practical reasons why that's the spot. But it wasn't until I took a step back and thought about it that I realized I'm going to be blocking my neighbor's lovely meadow. And we see the deer go in and out. He has a nice forested area that I wouldn't be able to see anymore. I'd just be looking at this ugly woodshed. So I decided to put that someplace else. So does anybody have any ideas of other sectors you might want to care about? I know that there's definitely one really big one I didn't put up there.
Water.
Water, rain. What is our rainfall? How does it flow? Any other ones?
Noise.
Noise, that's a good one. Out west, not so much here. A big sector analysis that you always put into a design is fire control. If you're out in Colorado, you want to set up some fire breaks and make sure you know what's going where. A next analysis that we want to do is called a zone analysis. There are 6 zones to any property, if you think of it this way. Usually it's pictured that it's due to proximity to your home. Your home is zone 0. Now, we could spend a whole lot of time about stuff to do to make your home sustainable and resilient. We're going to kind of skip that. We're talking food today, which is great. Zone 1 is right outside your home. It's the stuff that you'll probably manage about every day. Think of this as your annual veggie garden. But don't just think about stuff that you want to grow. Think about places you visit or you just walk past. So a good place for some Zone 1 stuff is if you have sidewalks or a patio that you're out on every day, or a walk to your garage. It would be nice to just go down and pick out some strawberries on the way from the garage back at home, or walk to your mailbox. Zone 2 is a little bit further out, and this is an area that you would manage often, but not necessarily every day. So more like a perennial garden, maybe some berry bushes and stuff that you would mulch or prune back every now and then and harvest. Chickens, I know a lot of people go out and like to collect eggs every day, but the point is you don't necessarily have to. With chickens, you can leave for 3, 4, 7, 10 days, and they don't need constant management. However, you want them nearby so you can throw some scraps and get eggs when you need them. Compost. My first compost bins that I built on my property, I thought looked a little ugly, so I decided to put them kind of back in my woods behind our shed where I keep a lot of equipment and stuff. And I realized, my goodness, it is a pain to walk every day to throw a couple banana peels all the way over there, which is the direct opposite of the way that I go to get to my garage. So I ended up moving my compost. Those are some thoughts for Zone 2. Zone 3 is an area that you would manage even less often. Maybe a small orchard, some vineyards, honeybee hives. You're not getting into beehives all that often. Maybe every few weeks if you really kind of micromanage, less if you do it more naturally. Zone 4 is an area that you would manage rarely. So this would be more of a mature food forest, which is something I'm going to talk a little bit about later. Some very mature apples, fruit, nut trees, a lot of shrubs that are well established underneath. Also a timber plot is something that I'm planning for my land since I own a heap with wood. Now Zone 5 is the area that you would never manage. This is stuff you want to leave just untouched, virgin wilderness. This is where you can go out and observe what's going on, take notes of natural systems so you can try to mimic them for yourself. Wildlife habitat, if you're a hunter, go out, and I now know where a couple of spots are that happen to grow mushrooms I'm pretty excited about, do some foraging, that kind of stuff. So that's Zone 5.
Not every home would have that many zones.
Exactly. That's correct. There's nothing wrong with skipping a few of these zones if it doesn't make sense. However, even, and I have a couple specific examples I'm going to show you here, even with a very small plot of land, you don't need 3-5 acres to find a way to do a little bit of this somewhere. And some of them are very important, as we're going to talk about. But there's nothing wrong with skipping some if it doesn't make sense for your design and what you're trying to do. Now, this is, nothing ever looks like this. That's pretty graphic, right? This maybe is going to be something that looks a little bit more similar to your yard. After I drew this, I realized, yeah, it kind of looks like my 2-year-old drew it, so I'll just say he did, and I'll save the embarrassment. So it doesn't have to be perfectly round circles. Stuff can be mixed up. Stuff doesn't have to totally, be that cookie cutter beautiful picture. Could look something like that. But to give you an idea, let's walk through a specific design example. This is my home. It's about 1.5 miles right up the road there. Moved there about 1.5 years ago. And I made sure to take a few screenshots of Google Earth before I did anything. So this is how it was right when I moved in, when there was nothing but the manicured lawn that the people before me liked, which I hate cutting. It's about 5 acres. That's my property line right there. There's a little bit of a creek running along the back. But my zone 0 is obviously my house. Zone 1, for my design, at least one of my designs that I float around, is right here. Yes. So the kitchen can have 2 doors. This is the kitchen, and the back of the house is the family room. But you can leave the kitchen here, or you can leave the kitchen here and come out. So I thought, well, this is a perfect place for a little herb garden. That's a zone 1, something I would manage often, I want to keep after, but we can get there easily. This is my main garden area. It's south-facing. It works out when I did my solar analysis, my solar sector analysis, that it gets a little bit of shade from some of these trees, but nothing crazy. That was my biggest and best spot without clearing a bunch of mature trees, which I don't want to do unless I have to, is right there. Another good spot is right here. I haven't done anything with this because I'd really like to do a greenhouse, again, for solar exposure. And then this I've started to work because we have this nice patio out here, which we're all the time out watching the kiddo play in the yard, or we take walks pretty much every day when it's not snowing, and we walk out and get our mail every day. So I want to make sure that that would be some cool stuff I can plant in zone 1. This is my idea for zone 2. You can see it's not very big. This is an area where I will have a pond, and I've been planting quite a few perennial bushy type things. I also would like to have a beehive over here, which you're going to see in zone 3, but it'd be one that I manage more often, so I mentioned it here. This is an area where I now have my chicken coop, and so my chicken coop's kind of right here, and I have one of my compost systems right along this fence line right there. And I did that for the reason of, I figured that when I come out in the morning, I can take last night's food scraps, feed them to the chickens, go out, do some weeding, do any harvesting in my garden area, whatever. On my way back in, I throw those weeds and anything that I've deadheaded or has died off, throw all that stuff to the chickens, go around, collect my eggs, and I go back in. So it's kind of one-stop shopping. I'm lazy, I don't like to walk too much. Zone 3 would be something like this. This will be that beehive that I told you about, as long as eventually some more mature, I'm thinking some nut trees here. This is a very small apple orchard. There's 7 mature apple trees, which we're thrilled to have. I don't really do much with that, except go out and prune every now and then, which I need a lot of pruning, and I mulch. That's a zone 3 type thing, a little bit of pruning, mulching, and then once a year when it's apple time, we go harvest. This is another zone 3, and this will be another beehive. Zone 4. This is that timber plot that I told you that I'd like to have. For 2 reasons I chose this. One is that the trees that are back there right now, it's kind of hard to tell from this picture, but they're actually spread out fairly well. It's not totally choked in and as dense as it is everywhere else on the property. So these trees are a lot easier to harvest. There's a lot of really good hardwood out there. And since it's not so dense, as I'm harvesting, I'm planting a few more and managing future stuff as I go. This area is going to be my future food forest, which I began, and you'll see. That'll take some time, but eventually I want all of this to grow up and be a very hands-off, just rarely managed place where I go out and gather some food at various levels. No more grass, I don't need to mow them anymore. And zone 5. Now, as I work and run out of projects, which is never going to happen, I'm sure some of this will be eaten away, and this won't always be zone 5. But I want to make sure that I have quite a lot of zone 5 for hunting, foraging, and observation. Now maybe you don't have 5 acres, and this is a little bit of a smaller plot, and I meant to look up what this was. I'm sorry for it, maybe 1/10 of an acre or something. But this was our last house. This was a house in Miamisburg that we moved from about 1.5 years ago. And this was now my design if we still lived in this house. Zone 1, I'd be using most of this yard, and it had good solar exposure for a huge annual and perennial garden bed. The kitchen was kind of right here, and there's a deck, so this would be a nice spot for a kitchen herb garden. And again, this is an area that got good sun, had good drainage, and we walk every day to our mailbox. Zone 2, and the reason I chose this is that this, if I had chickens there, I didn't, I would put them right here. One, it's near zone 1, and it's not too far of a walk to get my eggs, but something to consider, this neighbor was really cool. We talked a lot. She was kind of into this stuff. This neighbor, not so much. That's a big old privacy fence and a little bit of a curmudgeon. So if we weren't technically allowed to have chickens in my Edinburgh, I would have done it anyway. I would have put them right there for that reason. Kind of a neighbor sector analysis, if you will. Now, Bellbrook, as we talked, is not allowed to have chickens. I absolutely do not advocate doing that in Bellbrook since we're sponsored by the park department, but if you live in my Edinburgh, go ahead and get some chickens. Zone 3 would be more perennial stuff and some fruit trees and stuff like that. This was just a small plot of land, but this is just an area other than mowing we never really did anything with. This is where I put my beehive. It's protected by some fences. And Zone 5. It's really important if you're not going to do anything else to have a little bit of Zone 5. If nothing else, for the beneficial predators, so that they can kind of build up a population, have some cover. I wanted to make sure to have a spot of just raw wilderness, if you will, near my Zone 1 and my other perennials and stuff, just so that they can get out there and eat the bugs that I didn't want them to. So you'll notice here there's no Zone 4. It didn't really make sense, and honestly, maybe I could have combined Zones 2 and 3, and I may have been splitting hairs there. But that's an example of something that might work on a smaller plot. Anybody have any questions about zone analysis or sector analysis? Or anything else we talked about? So kind of the point of that is a lot of times people just get into this stuff and they start gathering a bunch of plants and then just start sticking them in the ground wherever. I guess my point is don't just jump to this. This is a more intricate design of my very small area, that zone 1 garden area that I showed you where my chickens were. Don't just jump to this. Kind of think about where you want to put stuff on a small level, but also on a larger sector level, the zone level. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about energy harvesting. We're going to be switching gears here. Energy harvesting is something we really want to do because that's energy that I don't have to put into the system. So for whatever reason, and sometimes there are good reasons, but us modern Americans want to get water as quickly off our roof as possible, gushing down our drain spout, out to the curb, and we just want to watch it swirl madly and bubble up down the storm drain or the sewer. It's gone. We don't have to worry about that. And then we pay money to have it piped back through a hose out to our garden. Or we're paying for our well pump to work, we're paying for those heavy 40-pound bags of salt that just gets pumped out. I'd much rather use this for my garden than do any of that other stuff. Also on a larger scale, it's a lot more ecologically sound. We have a lot of problems in this country due to rain runoff, due to agricultural land, with the pesticides and herbicides and all that stuff just gushing down our storm sewers and eventually out our rivers and stuff. We were just talking before we got here, we just realized as we're talking about fishing, is it safe to fish in a little Miami? Not so much because of all the farms and everything that's around here and the rain runoff and residue that gets into the little Miami. So we don't want water evacuation, we want water harvesting. So a question for you guys, a little bit of a pop quiz. Can anybody tell me what is the USA's largest export if we measure only in tonnage? Anybody have an idea? You can't answer, you can't answer. They got a wild guess.
Soil.
Topsoil, that's right. If you measure only in tonnage, topsoil is our biggest export. And what that results in, due to the pesticides, the herbicides, and fertilizers, and chemicals, and all that stuff, is that most people don't realize this. Each year there's a dead zone that forms in the Gulf of Mexico, and it varies up or down, but it's usually about the size of Connecticut. If we can harvest water, keep it local, put it to use, we'd be much better off. So, and I'm not going to go deep into these because there's some very nice programs that right here in this building you can come to. Some rain gardens. You see that this city actually was very smart. This is somewhere out in, I don't remember where, but they designed it so that rain runoff will come off the streets and get into planned rain gardens. This is a rain barrel, and the only reason I wanted to show this picture is this is my rain barrel, and it's using the kit that you can purchase if you come to the workshop here at these classes, and they do a really nice job. For rain barrels, you can really get them almost anywhere. There's always some on Craigslist, between 8 and 12 bucks, you can pick one up. You can be a little stingy and get them for free from food processors, a lot of times from car washes, and they get their soap in these barrels. You always want to make sure and ask that they're food grade. You want to know what was in it. But they're the food grade plastic, HDPE, and they get their soap in it. So if you think about what's rinsed out soap barrels, that's about as clean as you can get. Or you can buy them. Those get a little pricey if you look online, especially for shipping. Really, the only thing you need to do for maintenance-wise, other than make sure you take care of mosquitoes, which is easy to do, is make sure you empty it before the first freeze comes along. And what's really cool about rain barrels, and why I think everybody needs to have at least one every downspout on their house, is this math right here. We get 1 inch of a rain event falling on 1,000 square feet of a roof footprint. So think about the footprint of your house, and that 1 inch can yield you 600 gallons of water. So that can go a long way, especially at quite a few rainbows. One thing that I think is really important to put into your rain barrel design, which isn't mentioned a lot, is a first flush diverter. If you are lucky enough to have a metal roof, this doesn't apply as much to you, but if you're like most people like me, you have the asphalt shingles. And the first few gallons that come down off your roof, especially mixing with that asphalt, can really have some nasty stuff in it. If possible, you want to try to keep that out of your barrel. Now, there's varying people that say, well, you absolutely can't water your veggies with that. It's okay if you do. From everything that I've read, me personally, I have no problem using this water on my veggies. I don't want to drink it without filtering it, but I have no problem watering with it. But what a first flush diverter is it takes those first few gallons of icky stuff and discards it and makes sure it doesn't go into the barrel. So as rain comes down, it comes into this doohickey, fills up the little tube, which as the water raises, it floats this ball up, and eventually the ball gets against the entry hole, which is a little bit smaller, seals it off once there's enough water, and then the cleaner water can go out and down your barrel. That's one design. It's a little more intricate. I'm a big fan of this one. This is the one I'm going to implement. We're coming down your downspout, due to gravity, of course. This is going to fill first. This is sealed and capped on the bottom. Keeps raining. It fills up till it's totally full, and then the clean water comes down this spigot into your barrel. So next time you go out, or when it's done raining, you go out and unscrew this and let all the nasty water go, and you screw it back in, and you're ready for your next diverter. The next thing that I think is so simple that all of us can do, and I'm not sure why it isn't more mainstream, is swales. How many people are familiar with what a swale is? Cool. So a swale, the 10-second elevator version definition, is a ditch dug on contour that can collect rainwater, slow it down so it can slowly seep into the landscape. Now, most of us know what a ditch is. What is contour? What the heck does that mean? The easiest way that I've found to figure out what contour is to look at a topographical map. So a contour is a line where all points are at the same elevation on that line. So if you were in Boy Scouts or 6th grade camp or something, you probably looked at topographical maps. This is a hill, and this is the peak or the top of that hill. And then each of these lines going down is a little bit further downhill. Does that make sense? Everybody cool with that? Okay. So one of these lines is a contour line. Each point on that line is dead level. Even some of these squiggly ones down here, it's still perfectly level. So if I was to go out and dig some swales on my imaginary watershed here, 3 swales would look like this. You have water that falls, it runs downhill, and that's what water does, and collects in this swale. It's just stopped dead in its tracks. When this one fills up, there are specific points called a sill that we incorporate, and it's a place where we want the water to overflow. It would overflow at specific points, travel on down, mix with all the rainwater that's falling here, and fill this swale. Same thing, when this one's full, it's going to overflow at a sill, mix with all the rainwater coming here, and go down and fill up this swale. This one looks squiggly. It might seem kind of weird, but if we walk the land, you would see that every point on this line is dead level. It takes a little bit of time. The rain stops. The water sits there maybe a few hours, maybe a day, something like that, depending on your soil content. Seeps in, hydrates everything around it, and after a very short amount of time, surprisingly, will just totally rehydrate the subsoil. It's actually been shown that in a short amount of time, springs that the original homesteaders dug and found back in the 1800s or something that had just been dry for 150 years. Just a short amount of time putting some swales in has rehydrated the ground so well that those springs pop back up. Here's a cross section of a swale. If we were on the side of that hill and we're looking at the side of a swale, this is obviously uphill, this is downhill. Rain falls, travels downhill, gets gathered here in this swale, it stops, seeps in. Here's a picture of some small swales that I've started digging in that Zone 4 food forest area that I showed you that I don't want to mow anymore. These are kind of small and skinny. I'm kind of waiting to see. I'm using small and slow solutions, see how fast or slow they fill up so I know when to expand and make them wider and deeper. But this is uphill, water comes down, fills the swale, and then goes on further underneath into the subsoil. Add to it from here. A next technique that I'd like to just introduce is called Polyculture. And it's a German word which loosely translated can be translated into mound culture. Basically what it is think of a wood core raised bed. All it is a raised bed and you stuck a whole bunch of wood in the middle whenever you were building it. This is really a cool technique. It does a lot of very beneficial things. The first thing it does is it stores water. As rain falls and seeps into this raised bed, it gets collected in all of this rotting, decaying wood. I'm sure everybody that's been out walking the woods, especially in this area, you come across a log that's been under shade and maybe had some stuff growing on it. You go to kick it, it's just that real, mucky, kind of soggy stuff that just falls apart. That's what this wood becomes in a very short amount of time. It's like a sponge that just soaks up that water so that it can slowly release it during drier times when your plantings need it. The other thing that it does is that as that wood breaks down, it really just gives a hyper jump start to fungus and microbes and worms and all that other good stuff that's really necessary for a good ecosystem. It does break down over time more quickly than you think, depending on the hardness or softness of your wood, and then it just looks like any old raised bed in there if you were to dig down, but it still has all of these great water storing and all these other cool properties. Traditionally, the wood was piled above ground, and then the raised bed is on top to make about a 5 to 6 foot mound. I know that might look a little ugly, a lot of people don't want that in their yard, but it's a technique you can incorporate other ways. Last is deep mulch. This is something that maybe a lot of us are more familiar with and something we do all the time. The worst thing in the world is just bare soil. It's almost looking like skin's been ripped off or something. It's easy for moisture to evaporate. It's easy for bad things to just burrow in. We want to cover that and protect it. And the easiest thing to do is with deep mulch. You use any kind of carbon stuff, wood chips, straw, dry leaves, and chop and drop, which is something that you usually see more in the Zone 3 or Zone 4 established food forests, but there's no reason you can't do it in a Zone 1 garden here. Chop and drop is just simply you need something deadheaded or pruned or pulled out because it's it's dead or whatever in the fall. Leave it where it is. It's mulch. It's going to decompose and enrich the soil. Now, a lot of people think that these kind of water harvesting techniques, Mike, why do we care? We're not in the deserts of Nevada or whatever. We're here with this terrible clay soil that doesn't soak in anyway, and we get 39 inches of rainfall. But it's not just for dry land. It's almost a panacea for solving all kinds of problems. We have too much water here. Well, all of these techniques, even though it's harvesting and holding water, can fix that. This is a picture of my land the spring after we moved in, so about 3 months after we moved in. And Patrick saw this because he helped me with this project here, that you're going to see something that I tried to mitigate, even though it's tough to get rid of totally, all this water stuff that we get every single spring. Anybody's yard kind of look like this in March? So what did I decide to do? I wanted to stack functions and build some structures where I just kind of threw everything at it that I could think of. And there's one guy in particular that's done a lot of work in this area, and I'm just like, wow, that seems so cool, I need to try it, I need to see if it works. So I decided to combine swales, hugelculture, and deep mulch and build some beds in that muddy, mucky mess that I got good sun exposure for. So I dug some swales, water's going to run downhill, get captured in there. I filled those swales with some rotting wood to get a hugelculture effect, and then I built a raised bed over top and covered it with deep mulch. Now, I explained what contour was, but we didn't talk about how to find contour. First thing you can use is a laser level. You can see civic engineers or the guys out planning roadways and stuff. They use stuff like this. Man, it works great, but it is really, really expensive. I'm not going to go out and buy one of those. There's a very simple, almost ancient tribal tool called an A-frame level, and that's this guy right here that I built so that I could find contour on my land. Now, what you need is some scrap pieces of wood. I just had this out in my barn. And you form it in an A shape, and you attach some kind of a weight on the bottom. And yes, I know my weight could have been 12 fluid ounces heavier, but it's not. I had it laying around whenever I decided to do this project. So you need to build an A-frame, and then you need to calibrate it. It's very simple. You get 2 spots on a land, preferably with a little bit of slope. Do something like that. Whenever your string settles down, you mark where the string is. You make sure, because you've marked the land, you know where you're going, flip it 180 degrees. Once your string settles down, you mark where that spot is, where the string settles. You find exactly what's in the middle of that, and that is dead level. So this, permanent marker spot, that is dead level because I calibrated this. So how you use this guy is you go along, I have my awesome representation of a hill here. Fancy, free class. So if this is a slope of a hill, we got uphill and we got downhill, and you're trying to find out where 2 spots on this slope are level. Well, my A-frame's telling me it's not happy there, that's not good. Move a little bit, well, my A-frame's telling me it's not happy in those 2 spots. But you play with it, you wait for things to settle down. These 2 spots on this cardboard are exactly at the same elevation. Now you mark them with spray paint or flags, or you'll see here in the next slide, I kind of raided my kids' project box and stole some popsicle sticks, and that's what I used to mark any place where my legs were that were at dead level. Now another thing you can do if you don't like the old school technology here is once you have it calibrated and you know that you're at dead level, you can just kind of zip tie on a level and move it as you need to. An actual level that you're buying at a hardware store. So that's how you find contour very easily, very cheaply. You find contour, you mark it. This is that zone 1 garden area that I showed. It looks perfectly flat when you're standing there, but almost nothing in nature is perfectly flat. My A-frame level found what my contour was. This was the beginning of it, and as you'll see, what it did is it kind of snaked was my contour line. So Patrick and I marked our contour, then we started digging. We picked a lovely soggy March day to build this first of beds. It was actually kind of cool though because we saw water filling up and I could see the level of the water. Make sure it's low. So this is the hole that we dug on contour, the ditch on contour. Filled it with